I've always thrived in the late hours, and Maria was my perfect match in that regard. We relished those weekend nights when the bass from the music coursed through us and neon lights turned the darkness into a kaleidoscope. One Friday, we decided to explore a recently opened nightclub on the edge of town. There were whispers about its unsettling ambience, but we dismissed them as exaggerations meant to boost the club's mystique. The venue turned out to be a dilapidated warehouse repurposed into a nightclub, ominously named Phantom Lounge. As soon as we pulled up, an unsettling feeling washed over me. The building's exterior was daunting, with shattered windows and overgrown vines clinging to the walls, yet the crowd of excited partygoers eased our apprehension. The doorman, a massive figure with a stern face, scrutinized our IDs before granting us entry in silence. As we stepped inside, the interior was a stark contrast to the cold, decrepit exterior. It was a world of its own, filled with pulsating lights, dark corners, and a haze of smoke that added to the mystique. The club was packed, bodies swaying to the hypnotic beats of the DJ. The air was thick with a mix of sweat, perfume, and the distinct aroma of something sweet and intoxicating. Maria and I navigated through the crowd, finding a spot near the dance floor. The club was packed, bodies swaying to the rhythm of the music, a blend of hypnotic beats that seemed to pull us into a trance. The lights flickered and danced across the room, casting eerie shadows on the walls and ceiling. The air was thick with the smell of sweat, perfume, and a faint, sweet scent that I couldn't quite place. As we danced, I couldn't shake off the feeling that something was watching us. The sensation was subtle at first, a prickling at the back of my neck. I tried to ignore it, losing myself in the music, but the feeling grew stronger with each passing minute. I scanned the crowd, looking for anything out of place, but everyone seemed caught up in their own world, oblivious to the unease creeping over me. I turned to Maria, hoping her presence would offer some reassurance in the midst of the eerie surroundings. She was deeply immersed in the music, her eyes closed and a serene smile playing on her lips. The way she moved was captivating, her body undulating with the rhythm in a fluid, almost hypnotic dance. It was as though she had transcended the physical realm, lost in a trance that seemed to connect her to the very essence of the music. For a brief moment, I felt a pang of envy, wishing I could lose myself in the music with the same ease and grace. But as I watched her, a growing sense of discomfort began to creep in. The contrast between her calm and the increasingly unsettling atmosphere around us only heightened my unease. The shadows in the club appeared to grow darker and more oppressive, despite the pulsating lights and heat from the crowded dance floor. A strange chill began to seep into the air, an eerie contrast to the warmth of the throng of people dancing around us. I looked around, my gaze shifting nervously from one unfamiliar face to another, trying to pinpoint what was causing my mounting discomfort. Each fleeting glance seemed to heighten my sense of disquiet, as if something unseen was lurking just beyond the edges of my vision. The lively energy of the room felt increasingly out of place against the backdrop of my growing apprehension. I shook my head and said to myself, "Nothing is wrong. Just enjoy the party. This is just my overactive imagination." But the feeling of being watched persisted, gnawing at the edges of my consciousness. I tried to focus on the music, the pulsing beat that thrummed through my veins, but the unease wouldn't let go. A few hours in, I needed a break. I signaled to Maria, pointing towards the bar. She nodded, and I made my way through the throng of people. The bartender, a tall, lanky man with hollow eyes, served me a drink without a word. As I sipped, I noticed a door at the far end of the bar. It was slightly ajar, and beyond it, a dark hallway beckoned. Curiosity got the better of me. Leaving my drink, I slipped through the door. The hallway was dimly lit, the air thick with an unsettling silence. I walked cautiously, the sound of my footsteps echoing against the walls. The further I went, the colder it became. Goosebumps prickled my skin, and my breath came out in visible puffs. At the end of the hallway, I found another door, this one locked. I turned to leave, but a soft whisper froze me in place. "Help me," it said, barely audible but clear as day. My heart raced. I couldn't tell if it was a figment of my imagination or something real. Against my better judgment, I pressed my ear to the door. The whispers grew louder, more urgent. "Help me, please." Summoning my courage, I pushed against the door. To my surprise, it creaked open. Inside was a small room, illuminated by a single, flickering bulb. The walls were lined with old, dusty mirrors, each reflecting a distorted version of the room. In the center stood a woman, her back to me, dressed in an old-fashioned gown. Her hair was long and matted, obscuring her face. "Are you okay?" I asked, my voice trembling. She turned slowly, and as she did, my blood ran cold. Her eyes were hollow, void of any life, and her face was a mask of sorrow and pain. "You shouldn't have come here," she whispered, her voice echoing in the small room. I backed away, but the door slammed shut behind me. Panic set in as I tried to open it, but it wouldn't budge. The woman moved closer, her movements slow and deliberate. "They trapped me here," she said, her voice filled with despair. "And now, you're trapped too." I pounded on the door, screaming for help, but the music from the club drowned out my cries. The room grew colder, the air thick with an oppressive presence. The mirrors began to rattle, and the reflections distorted even more, their faces twisted in silent screams. The woman reached out, her hand cold as ice. "You have to find the key," she said. "It's the only way out." Desperation took over. I searched the room, my hands trembling, my heart pounding in my ears. In one of the mirrors, I saw a glint of something metallic. Reaching behind it, I found an old, rusty key. As I turned to use it, the woman was right behind me, her eyes pleading. "Hurry," she urged. With shaking hands, I unlocked the door and bolted out of the room, not daring to look back. I ran down the hallway, my breath ragged, the whispers still echoing in my mind. I burst back into the club, the warmth and noise hitting me like a wave. Maria found me, concern etched on her face. "Where have you been? You look like you've seen a ghost." I didn't have the words to explain the terror that gripped my heart. My mind raced with the images of the hollow-eyed woman and the oppressive darkness that seemed to swallow me whole. We left the club immediately, stumbling out into the cool night air, our breaths coming in ragged gasps. The once vibrant neon lights of the Phantom Lounge now seemed like ominous beacons, warning others to stay away. As we walked briskly to the car, Maria kept glancing at me, her face etched with concern and confusion. "What happened in there?" she finally asked, her voice trembling. I shook my head, unable to articulate the horrors I had just witnessed. The words caught in my throat, tangled with fear and disbelief. The drive home was silent. When we finally reached my apartment, I turned to her, my voice barely more than a whisper. "We can't go back there. Ever." She gave a slow, uneasy nod, her eyes reflecting a depth of fear that sent a shiver down my spine. "I agree," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the thumping music. "Whatever this place is, it's far from safe." Her gaze darted around, as though she could see something I couldn't, and the haunted look in her eyes made it clear that her sense of dread was just as intense as mine. The palpable tension between us only served to heighten my own growing anxiety, as we both stood on edge, acutely aware of the unsettling aura that had settled over the club. In the solitude of my quiet moments, when the noise of the world faded and I was left alone with my thoughts, I couldn't help but dwell on the mysterious woman I had encountered. Who was she? What tragic events had led her to that shadowy, forsaken place? My mind was consumed with these questions, each one more insistent than the last. The image of her, trapped in that bleak and desolate setting, haunted me, and despite my relentless searching for answers, I knew deep down that some enigmas are destined to remain shrouded in darkness.